Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on January 16th, 2025. Today, we're very pleased to be joined by Diego Sequera from Caracas, Venezuela. Diego is a columnist for Mision Verdad, which does investigative journalism and political analysis, not only in the region of Latin America, more broadly across the world. And it is, however, a Spanish language media outlet. We're very pleased to be joined by Diego because he has been so very much in demand in the past couple of weeks in the alternative media, and with good reason. He has wonderful insights into what is happening in Venezuela. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you. Happy to be here.
I believe the last time you and I actually crossed paths was, it's either going to be in May of last year when I was in Iran for the Sobe Media Festival, or was
That's
that
correct.
it, Diego?
Yeah.
And then we sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we met, before that we met several times here in Caracas, the year before that.
When I came as an election observer for the presidential election.
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
So this is, however, the first time we've had you on the program, and I've got plenty of questions for you. So let's get started. And
Sure.
And just before I ask my first one, I want to remind our audience, if you find this video to be informative, please like and share it. Please hit the bell icon so you get direct notification of our video publications. And if you're not a subscriber, we warmly encourage you to become one. So, Diego, in the immediate aftermath of the Trump regime's kidnapping of President Maduro, Trump was asked about President Maduro's most visible opponent, Corina Machado, and in a highly controversial move, the Nobel Committee had just awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to Machado. And surprisingly, when asked about her, Trump said at the time, I think this was the day after the kidnapping, that he had not spoken to her and that he doubted she had enough respect and popularity among Venezuelans to assume power. Now, Machado, it seems, was not deterred by these embarrassing remarks. She just managed to meet with Donald Trump this week, and yesterday she made an unusual announcement, and it related, in fact, to her Nobel Peace Prize. And I just want to share with you here what Ms. Machado had to say.
Presented the President of the United States the medal of the Nobel Peace Prize.
They will never give me a Nobel Peace Prize.
I think I'm going to get a Nobel Prize for a lot of things if they gave it out fairly, which they don't.
I can't think of anybody in history that should get the Nobel Prize more than me.
Now, that little montage was courtesy of CNN. We've all been amazed, Diego, about how this man, this shameless man, has been clamoring for the Nobel Peace Prize while he's waging war all over the world. But I'm more interested in your thoughts about what Machado did and about what you think this meeting signifies, if anything.
You know, seeing what we just seen, it's amazing how psychology or even psychiatry sometimes seems to be like an extra layer of the whole, the whole analysis in order to make some sense of some stuff that are going on and how they can be understood. And I think that goes for both Trump or Machado, for that matter. And at least at the very least up to this moment, it doesn't seem to have any significant place on the grand scheme of things, according to what's actually unfolding or developing here in Venezuela. And actually, I don't know if you also saw that part of the stunt was, well, we saw it. I mean, was giving away her medal, her physical prize of the Nobel Peace Prize to Trump. So it's even worse after, the Nobel Foundation, which already had like a terrible call, warning that this wasn't, this isn't something you couldn't transfer just like that. And then they said you can give away the medal, but the title remains. There's no change in the actual decision, which even makes all this a wider sort of geopolitical blooper, in some way or another. Because look at everything that now it's so clear. now that it evinces itself in these ways, be it Trump's constant tantrum, be it the willingness of Maria Corina Machado to do whatever needs to be done in order to be part of the picture. Think about the lameness of the whole of the substance itself of the whole Nobel Peace Prize, and the reasons why it was given to a person that basically has supported the worst causes in the world, starting with Gaza. I mean, calling her to him, calling Netanyahu, and congratulating him for his fierce and powerful campaign in Gaza. And the same person who actually asked them in 2018 to have political and military support to the Likud. And we're talking about the same person who was basically justified and defended the decision of systematical humiliation and even worse to Venezuelan deported migrants in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So everything, I mean, it's how are you able to, to do acrobatics with all of this without addressing precisely all these elements that are so clear to anyone?
Yeah.
That's the nice part, but there's no actual, sorry.
I was just going to say, in many ways, that little video clip, I'm sorry to interrupt you, is almost perfectly symbolic of the time in which we live. I mean, to see somebody who, who is the person you just described, receiving this medal, which was an outrage in and of itself, and then giving it to a war criminal who is currently carrying out a genocide in Gaza with Netanyahu, both of whom are being praised by Machado. I mean, it seems to encapsulate the perversity of the age in which we live. I had to get that off my chest, Diego. But
no, absolutely not. But you're absolutely right. I mean, and these kind of things are quite important to always take into account during this suicidal and vain times.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the banality of it all. I mean, it is absolutely tragic. I'm going to quote, this is such a weird time, I'm going to make this quote. I'm quoting now Ehud Olmert, the way he referred to Netanyahu, because they asked him, describe him in one word, and he said, emptiness. And this is so accurate regarding precisely Maria Corina Machado in that sense. I mean, it's just, she can fill herself with whatever needs to be done, regardless of its morality or anything else. And this goes beyond, up to this point, of the politics of it all. I mean, these are also personal elements at play here. This is Shakespeare to some extent,
Yes.
Or classic tragic hubris.
I think it's so important at this point that I think we underplay in the commentary at the importance of the psyche of these persons. The
character.
The character is so important. It has major impacts on the course of human events, and there's too many. There's too much diminution. There's too much diminishing of the importance of character. I think
yes,
the course
absolutely.
of it. So since we're on the subject of a complete lack of character, I'd like to talk to you now about the oil executives who met with Donald Trump recently in the White House. And I'm going to play a clip of a comment or a set of comments made by the Exxon CEO. And just by way of background, many people will have heard that the Exxon CEO in this meeting told Donald Trump that Venezuela is uninvestable. And I've heard many analysts jump on that and say, well, that means that Exxon has no interest in investing in Venezuela. However, when I heard his comments in full, I came to a different conclusion. I'd like to show this to you and get your response.
A long history in Venezuela. In fact, we first got into Venezuela back in 1940s. We've had our assets seized there twice. And so you can imagine to re-enter a third time would require some pretty significant changes from what we've historically seen here and what is currently the state. If we look at the legal and commercial constructs and frameworks in place today in Venezuela, today it's uninvestable. And so significant changes have to be made to those commercial frameworks, the legal system. There has to be durable investment protections, and there has to be a change to the hydrocarbon laws in the country. We're confident that with this administration and President Trump working hand in hand with the Venezuelan government, that those changes can be put in place.
So he said he's confident that his laundry list of demands can be satisfied. That doesn't sound to me like he's rejecting the idea of investing in Venezuela. What's your take on all of this, Diego?
Yeah, I mean, I always stress the ExxonMobil angle to all of this, precisely because, yeah, you're absolutely right to catching the actual sense, the actual meaning of what he said, because he's actually complaining about this hasn't been full regime change. There is no regime change in that sense, or it hasn't been regime change enough in order to us be able to work on a framework that we actually accept as the one worth for ExxonMobil. And but one more time, character in a way has also a saying here, or drama. You know, drama as the execution of theater. Not only, I mean, that could be comedy or tragedy. You know, it doesn't matter. The distinction at that point, I mean, theoretically speaking. But think about it one more time. Where's ExxonMobil, what's doing now, and what has been doing outside of Venezuela, but very close to Venezuela, for example, to take an idea. Or you can ask another question. How close actually Exxon is through funding to Marco Rubio's PAC? And how militant has Marco Rubio been pushing precisely the Exxon approach to big oil all this time? Because if you also contrast it with Chevron in that sense, there's a big difference, because Chevron was actually operating under, their own U.S. legal constraints, operating inside Venezuela throughout all this time, almost uninterrupted. And I say almost because it was interrupted by sanctions themselves. But this is a different model, right? Mm-hmm. From what Exxon, for example, is doing right now in Guyana. In Guyana, as the capture of the Guyanan state, and with the oil extraction in the Starbrook block in disputed waters with Venezuela, precisely through the Essequibo case, the Essequibo affair, the legacy, by the way, of the British Empire. Mm-hmm. But you see now that Exxon has unrestricted control of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana in many levels, precisely to fund their own impunity, their own unrestrictedness, regardless of ethics, on how they extract the goods and what else do they take and how much do they take, and especially how much do they leave and to whom. There's no actual oil authority in Guyana. There's no PDVSA, Guyana PDVSA.
You mean that there's no regulatory body that supervises?
Yes.
Wow.
There's no state entity. There's no state entity for it properly that actually centralizes this kind of work. I mean, like any other country, including the ones that don't actually produce oil, like any from Italy or Repsol, mm-hmm. Taking care of that, everything that has hydrocarbon related, downstream and upstream and everywhere else. So this is telling them the way Exxon really wants to approach things. And then you have Exxon's own, yes, it is a corporation, but corporations are cycles. Exxon's own personal history with Venezuela. Because back in 2007, when renationalization happened, in which actually, there was the full reframing of the type of contracts, the terms of the contracts and agreements with foreign companies doing oil exploitation in Venezuela with the Venezuelan state partners. And during that moment, there were basic terms for how things were going to go going forward. Mm-hmm. Precisely of this model. It was a 51% to 49%. It was actually a pretty fair one. 51% for this Venezuelan state and 49%. So, and they didn't accept the terms. Many did. And actually, they decided to do something else. They sue Venezuela, just like ConocoPhillips did, but not like Chevron, not like Halliburton, not like Valero. They stayed in Venezuela. They had contracts with PDVSA and other affiliates, companies from PDVSA, and they were operating here. Even you can see another clip. I don't know if you got it. There's another clip of precisely of the CEO or something of Halliburton, the exec they sent to this meeting, saying that they trusted, that they thanked the U.S. government for the opportunity. They trusted the team, and after they left Venezuela in 2019, and Trump asks, "Why did you leave Venezuela?" and this guy responds, "Because of sanctions." You know, so you have, on the big picture, you have to contrast this with what Trump has been saying since the start, and what has been changing regarding precisely that thing from the start to some days ago, in which nuances started like kicking in. And
I want to
admits, go on.
Well, I want to focus on one you say, because you mentioned nuance, one particular thing that he said, and ask you for your take on this. By the way, you said PDVSA, just for people who don't know
Yes,
what that
exactly.
Venezuelan state oil company. Is that correct, PDVSA?
Correct.
Okay.
Petróleo de Venezuela.
So the Exxon CEO talked about changes to Venezuela's hydrocarbon law. And I mean, he didn't really get into any detail there. He mean anything, but I imagine that what he would be looking for, broadly speaking, is an absolute minimum of environmental regulation or any kind of regulation, and the lowest conceivable royalties being paid to the Venezuelan state and people.
Exactly.
I would also imagine he wants to ensure that Exxon has majority control over any oil fields, oil assets that it has in Venezuela. Am I missing anything here? Do you think that sort of covers what he has in mind when he talks about changes to the hydrocarbon law?
At least on the that's the basis. There must be more, and even more when you go through more technical details. There must be more, and even more damaging. I mean, I'm not oil experts to detect this small particularities, but they might be as significant as what we're talking about, which is like the main guiding lines of what seems to be the way. Especially one more time, if you actually cut through the lobbying of what's going on in Guyana right now, in order to understand at least on facts. But that's another thing. Just take this into account. Just put yourself in the place of these guys, controlling already Guyana, controlling the starboard block, which is lighter oil, and at the same time, the new big reserves, and at the same time being able to control the Orinoco Belt, which is where the largest oil reserves in the world are, at the same time. I mean, this can make someone quite greedy and be able to push for further and further, far more beneficial reforms for them, if possible, at least. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how much theatrics there's actually at play here between Trump and the oil corp companies. This is also Susie Wiles kind of, the chief of staff kind of setting in order to take something to an extreme and then to the other one and focus on the middle ground and make it more acceptable. That's a kind of perception strategy she always does. And she has a big saying in everything that's going on right now, regardless of the fact that it also seems that there's not much of a coherent plan, at least on the political level, which it seems to be more clear on other aspects, precisely in trying to get the strongest grip on the Venezuelan oil and give some new steroids to the value of dollar in a moment to the petrodollar in a moment like this, when they're losing far more leverage. But that doesn't seem either to be an easy run the way Trump has been talking about it. I mean, I guess up to this point, your audience must realize that Venezuela, I mean, Trump is not under direct control of Venezuela, of the Venezuelan state, of the Venezuelan society, the Venezuelan government at this point. and we have a normal daily life, we are still facing a far more complex than before situation, and at the same time dealing with the silent, I think, yes, aftermath of being bombed, at least in Caracas, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And sure, it wasn't back that 2003 or something of that sort, but it's enough for us, especially if you haven't gone through it. And I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about the people from the city I live in.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's a lot, you know?
Understood. I want to get into that, actually, this whole question of control in some detail with you. And I'd like to begin by talking about the reported dismissal by interim president Delcy Rodriguez of the general who was in command of President Maduro's presidential honor guard. I understand his name is Javier Marcano Tabata. And you can see up here a report from, this is from the BBC on January 7th, that he had been sacked in the aftermath of the kidnapping of President Maduro. And it's by way of background, Diego, you know, and I've heard you address this subject several times in your recent interviews. There was a lot of speculation that President Maduro was betrayed. And for what it's worth, on our program, we have urged caution in this regard because there's so little information about what exactly happened. And I've seen some people, I'm not going to name them, prominent commentators in the alternative media, who said with absolute certainty not only that he was betrayed, but that he was betrayed by the entire military and political elite of Venezuela, which I just see no evidence for such a broad and sweeping claim. But at the same time, it seems remarkable that they managed to kidnap the president without sustaining a single soldier killed in action. Not one American soldier was killed. Not one helicopter was brought down. And so I'm curious, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about who this man is, this general? Was he in fact dismissed? And what do you make of the fact that he was dismissed? Is it simply, do you think it's just incompetence? Or do you think there's something more going on here?
You know, I understand the anxiety and the urgency from even friendly people. I mean, people who are actually understanding what's going on, to get some answers ASAP. Because I mean, it's even it's a necessity to some extent. But if you saw it from the Venezuelan experience, you know that the definitive answers to this kind of things always take a bit more time. Usually they do appear, and they are properly explained, officially explained. Usually this kind of sensitive matters, I don't know if this is going to be the case, I don't know when or how. Could be something that Diosdado Cabello could say, or someone else. I mean, the president of the National Assembly or something. But this kind of sensitive matters always have a response, an explanation. And this is quite hazy in so many ways. And there are some presumptions you can make based on deduction, because they lack explanation. Regarding some also other technicalities that make sense, for example, or the whole electronic warfare element to this, and so on, and also the spinning that has coming from Western media in different shapes and forms. You know, as far as I know, that's not true regarding General Tabata Molina. He's just been rechanged. I mean, and that also makes sense regarding the decisions that now the acting president wants to make, for whatever reasons. I mean, he was replaced by another general who has also an important background in intelligence. So that's as far as I know regarding that. So I won't give credence to something that I actually ignore in that sense. And so like I said, I mean,
sorry, you're saying it's not. You're saying it's not really clear that he was in fact fired. He was more shuffled to a different position rather than fired. Is that
probably yes, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Understood. Right.
Yes.
And can you, a little bit about his background? Is this a man who has a long record of loyalty to Chavismo, to the government?
Sure, and there's another thing regarding him. If you want to like put him in some place, previous to this, he was actually the commander of the militias, and he actually took them to another level in that sense, from where they were regarding training, preparedness, and whatnot. So this is a serious guy, and it's hard to place I don't know, adjectives or something in a context that I actually would be just daring to say because I'm actually ignoring it.
Mhm.
So this is still a subject I tread carefully because of, well, it's high because it's incredibly sensitive.
Understood.
But,
And so
but this is another thing. Yeah, go on.
Is it fair to say that in your own mind, this remains an open question? You've not come to a firm landing one way or another as to whether it was
Yes,
a bit.
absolutely. In my case, personally, that's the case. And this has happened before. I mean, previous incidents in the past that are actually have an explanation a bit later.
Mhm.
And this is from the Venezuelan point of view. I'm sorry for, I mean, I know it might be not so functional to others, but that's how it usually is, or it has been in some cases. And that's how I'm assuming it at this point. Yes, so I don't have a final say. I do believe that, yeah, sometimes some people do it willfully, especially on mainstream media and others, or even in some quarters of the left, if you will. And some people maybe not in the sense of not looking to harm, but just filling the void, filling the vacuums they find through their own analysis, thinking about, some internal inside job or something of that sort. But at the same time, I don't know how much they realize that they can also feed some ways of sowing division.
Right.
I'm saying this not in the sense of, but it's important. I'm not saying this in the sense of scolding or pointing at people in that sense. It's just to depict the complexities and the ambiguity of these moments on media and regarding all these new subjects that are happening right now. Not only Venezuela in that sense, because it's a pretty wild moment. And I agree with the LaRouche crowd when they say that this is entering a new stage, a new phase, actually, in many ways.
I did notice a bit of a pattern, Diego, that the people who seem most confident that there had been a betrayal are ideologically hostile to socialism. So make of that what you will. But
Exactly.
whether that was influencing them, I don't know. But it was quite striking to me that those people having that political perspective were very quick to come to the conclusion that there had been a massive betrayal of President Maduro. Now, I'd like to talk to you now about the civilian leadership of the country, and specifically Interim President Rodriguez. She had a conversation, we're told recently, with the war criminal Donald Trump. And after the conversation, this apparently was the day before Trump met with Machado yesterday. So this would have been, I think, on Wednesday. And afterwards, Trump told the media that Delcy Rodriguez is a terrific person. And for her part, President Rodriguez was more restrained in her commentary, I would say. She described her conversation with Donald Trump as productive and courteous. Now, I have to tell you that I don't draw any, strong inferences from any of this, because I think she's obviously in a very, very complicated and difficult position, given the balance of military forces in the region. But it is odd that the new president of Venezuela, would use such diplomatic language when she's talking to somebody who has kidnapped the president, murdered dozens of Venezuelans and dozens of Cubans in an illegal assault on the country, blown up ships carrying Venezuelan civilians, imposed a blockade on the country, tried to destroy its economy with crushing sanctions. It's a bit, odd to hear that kind of language. I think the natural human reaction of anybody in President Rodriguez's position would be to spew hostility. This certainly would be my inclination. But I'm not in her position. I'm not in her position. I don't. So what do you make of this? What do you make of the tone?
But because she has actually said everything that you just mentioned. She has actually said it also, usually in the same addresses. Maybe not in the context of the comment when she reported the call in the way she did, and because surely it could be a courteous, and educated conversation. That's for sure. That's what it means. But regarding addressing precisely all that you said, she's been saying it. She said it yesterday on the National Assembly. As you know, in the first quarter, the first 15 days of the year, the president has to have an accountability speech at the National Assembly by law. And it was in this context that she actually precisely addressed each and every of these aspects that you're mentioning, including the bombing, including that Venezuela is still under threat. So what I'm trying to say here, and yeah, it's you have just got to follow her and try to follow the full clip in that sense, and because she says it in many ways. She has addressed all of this, and she also has done moves that also prove her point. For example, regarding Russia, China, and Iran, which is basically, stating that they're still there. The first 3 foreign delegates she met after she was sworn, visiting the Chinese ambassador. I mean, this is part of the dynamic now as well, and it's facing precisely this, the scope of these events. But there's no sign of actual, for example, deliverance of that demand from the United States of cutting ties with all the multipolar players, regardless of the insistence. And also the other thing is, Delcy Rodriguez is a very skillful and sophisticated person. And she has proven this time and again, and also has, talking about character one more time, a very strong will. And this is not boilerplate. You can check it out anywhere. You can find any remarks about these 3 things I've just said about her. And this is a moment to use all of that, by the way, especially when the current situation, the current circumstances, which bled with character, by the way, keeping up the the drama, theatrics, leitmotif, and the substance also of this very human part of the story. And she has to play with different tools of resistance as well, given the current situation, which are never something that's going to be completely satisfying for many people, especially facing this kind of very turbulent, uncharted waters in which Venezuela is now, and it's actually allowed Trump and the empire, through these new shockwaves, to declare this new phase in which they are going to be, even more enthusiastic about doing this kind of misadventures whenever it's needed, or at least trying to threaten with that. And they did, but they failed in Iran just now. There's also, timing here has a big saying as well. And these things brings the even wider picture regarding the whole situation. And this is where she is maneuvering in a moment that she has to keep the national and societal stability. And this has been acknowledged by each and every player, but this is new in that sense. This is completely new. In most of its aspects, it's completely new. And I think it's a different ballgame. And now it's the historical test that she faces foremost, and the rest of the cabinet, which is the same of Nicolás Maduro. There hasn't been any dramatic change. And this follows a plan he left also, according to what Delcy Rodriguez has said, according to what Jorge Rodriguez, the president of parliament, has said, according to Nicolás Maduro Guerra, member of parliament and the son of the president. There was a plan. This was a scenario that was conceived and which demanded, which were the priorities and the risks and so on, in how to move forward. And I think there's a heavy component of preserving precisely life and the viability of the state and the Venezuelan social fabric, regardless of how embattled it has been for more than a decade.
And to be completely fair to President Rodriguez, her language reminds me in many ways of the tone that Vladimir Putin has adopted with respect to the Trump regime. It's amazing. I've been amazed many times. And Russia obviously is in a better position than Venezuela to resist. It's a much bigger country. It has much more resources, a much bigger military and so forth. But despite all of the aggression and hostility that the U.S. government has shown, he continuously uses language like partners. He'll say, our American partners, and he won't resort to the kind of language that American officials throw at him. He won't call them thugs, he won't call them dictators and so forth, although these are perfectly fair descriptions of these people who run the U.S. government. Sure. So I understand. I think I understand the thinking behind all of this, but I wanted you to sort of flesh that out for us. And I also wanted to ask you about other aspects of this criminal military adventure that Trump launched against Venezuela, and namely, I want to start with the Cubans who were killed, and there were 32 of them, we are told. Here is a poster identifying the 32 victims of the American aggression. They were just laid to rest, I understand, in Cuba. Can you tell us, what do you know about, first of all, what their role was in Venezuela at the time they were killed, and what are the circumstances of their killing? Do we know how exactly they died?
Well, there's several angles to this. I haven't followed it that thoroughly, and I basically allowed the narrative to develop. And I don't know if you saw the coffins yesterday.
No, I didn't.
This is rather horrifying. They were pretty small. I mean, this kind of explained something big hit them, most of them. Mm-hmm. And they have military ranks, and they are members of the Interior Ministry, and maybe they were doing advising capacity in some sort. I don't know exactly. And I think that anyway, the Cuban media is already profiling them and showing who they were, actually. And my guess also it has to do with many different capacities and position, in many ways. And this is part of historical cooperation also. It's part of the wider cooperation between Venezuela and Cuba for a long while. This has also been the case. And it's funny enough how some people try to highlight this in some way, cast a light on how reliant was Venezuela on Cuba or something like that. And that's far from truth, especially now, especially facing what both countries have been facing. But that doesn't mean there wasn't any kind of cooperation between the two. But into detail, I haven't gone further just because also I haven't, to be honest, been able to catch up with many of these things, precisely being on commenting and giving interviews. So I've reduced my scope of following through the day because of this kind of distractions for the time being, of course. I mean, I think I still have to do it. So that also that also explains why there are some angles in which I'm pretty. I don't have enough to make to give a proper idea, and I'm sorry for that. This is one of them, for example.
Just to go back to something you said a moment ago, because this is actually the main thing I wanted. Well, one of the things I was curious about, because there was speculation that these men were killed by someone on the inside. They were shot, and I take it from your remarks that actually we don't even know that they were shot. They might have been killed, for example, in an airstrike, which effectively.
Well, some of them were pretty small, at least. I mean, and it's quite perverse to say this, but it's also harrowing image, mind you. This is not just evidence. I mean, this has a charge to it. It has a meaning. It has a sense. It has a mourning. It has a grieving. It has a significance to the Cubans and the Venezuelans in many ways. So this is not just a mere image. This is also important to stress because of, the actual, burden that this kind of images bear. It's not just any picture. And I think that's also important to take into account. But if we go forensics on this, that's the part I saw. If it is the actual accurate footage of this, because I'm going to put that even under examination for the time being, just because there's a lot of crazy things running around, even sloppy ones and even far more elaborate ones regarding many things, filling the gap in many ways, trying to control the narrative, which, by the way, it hasn't been that successful, regardless of the present question that you've asked already, up to this point. I mean, not already, up to this point, in which, those are fundamental questions. And sometimes I've been more generous in responding than others. Mm-hmm. But thinking about the whole the whole thing, thinking about what else this also brings. I was losing the track of what the train of thought precisely because I got distracted with something here. I'm sorry.
Well, just to go back to
Yeah.
so as far as you know, there has not been an official confirmation about how they died from the Venezuelan government. It remains an open question whether they were shot or they were killed in an airstrike. We just don't know at this stage. Is that fair?
Well, at least I don't know. Maybe I missed something.
I haven't seen anything either for what it's worth. I've seen no official
Exactly.
description.
Yeah, but that's right. Yeah, but I mean, it's go on, please.
So another interesting development since the kidnapping has been release of prisoners by the Venezuelan penitentiary system. And here's a statement from the penitentiary system. I personally can't translate this for our audience, but I read an article which purported to translate it. And according to the translation, these measures, I'm quoting, "These measures have benefited individuals deprived of their liberty for acts associated with altering the constitutional order and threatening the stability of the nation. These actions follow up on the comprehensive review of cases voluntarily initiated by constitutional president Nicolás Maduro. Moros, this process has maintained its continuity under the direction of acting President Delcy Eloina Rodriguez Gomez within the framework of a policy oriented towards justice, dialogue, and the preservation of peace." Can you tell us a little more about what's going on here, Diego? Who are these people, and why are they being released at this time?
By the way, I remember what I lost track of just a moment ago, and it was precisely that even in the narrative battle, they haven't succeeded, but at least in the most important moments. If you see, for example, what they tried to do with Nicolás Maduro and the symbol they tried to create, it didn't work, and actually worked the other way around. Just to mention that just to keep it there, just to leave stated that I remembered what I was saying. Back to the question, Dimitri. Yeah, I mean, many of these people, for example, that were part of the post-electoral violence from 2024 on different levels of felonies, I guess, and crimes. And it's also being clearly stated that the people who committed severe crimes, just like murder or drug trafficking, are still in jail, and they're not going to be released. And this has been also this also proves the point that what Nicolás Maduro was aiming before January the 3rd regarding a new set of dialogue inside the country. This is important. And of course, it also, in a way, seems to be beneficial for Venezuela in the sense of we release these people, which it's fine. I mean, as long as these are not exactly murderers or something else severe, as a strong lobbyist of an invasion, opening the gates in a highly operational way, in a plot to allow Venezuela to be invaded. I don't see the reason for them why not being released as a good faith gesture. And also maybe, I don't know, there are many cases here. You have from politicians that engaged in different plots and threats, to people who probably were rioting to a violent extent at some moment, and they are all being released. And if you follow Trump's literature on Truth Social, you'll see that he actually, even when this process started, after January the 3rd, he said he was pleased, and he dismissed, or he ruled out, or he called off a second strike against Venezuela. And I think these two things in tandem describes a lot the kind of actual complexity and the kind of management that needs to be done on such a position, beyond the fact of what's going on with the people who were in prison for many reasons, for many crimes. And if there were excesses, it will be, well, let them denounce them, and let it be taken into court or whatever. because that also has happened before, Dimitri. I mean, in past complex situations in which we have the government was facing a color-coded revolution that was violent, that was attacking the same way like we saw in Iran last week. Even I mean, to be fair with the comparison, maybe a less violent, but you're already using weaponry and bombs and so on. In some cases, when there has been like police excesses of any sort, they have also been prosecuted.
You're referring to
Venezuela.
Venezuela.
It's important to say this. Yes, I'm talking about Venezuela and Venezuela law enforcement in this kind of moments. And I'm talking about, I'm talking about people that, officers that have been denounced and has been put into justice, put into court and trial for what they did. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say here is it's not a one-way thing, and it's not the picture that everyone wants to promote and has been promoting for years and decades regarding what Venezuela is. No one talks about the complexities and the dangers of this kind of things that we've gone through also, the high level of violence, the criminal networks, the destruction and the killing. No one talks about that part.
Right. One thing that occurred to me, Diego, this is just pure speculation on my part, but I'm interested in your thoughts about this, is that the release of if some of these individuals were in fact political opponents of the Maduro government who engaged in some form of violence, and they're being released now, maybe this is a precursor. I have no evidence to back this up. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about this. This is a precursor to building some sort of a power sharing arrangement between the current government and the political group or whatever it is represented by Machado. Do you believe that there is any realistic prospect of these two constituencies, namely Chavismo represented by Delcy Rodriguez and Machado, ever entering into any kind of a power sharing arrangement? Do you think this is simply not realistic at all?
Very, very extremely hard to imagine in the best case, and as a possibility, not as a given. But there are two things here to take into account that are also important, and maybe most of your audience knows about this, but it's good to also to remember this kind of thing. But there's not one opposition inside Venezuela, and actually it participates in elections. They acknowledge the Venezuelan system. They acknowledge the Venezuelan government and state. They also, most of them condemn sanctions. Most of them condemn or didn't agree with the U.S. military assault against Venezuela. They were against this kind of idea, which is basically upheld by the extremist faction of the opposition, in which Corina Machado actually belongs to. The difference is that she has the clout and the access and the whole coverage of mainstream media and mainstream politics in the West. That's the only difference. But also regarding power sharing, there were elections, and many of these opposition parties participated in them. There were elections for governor, mayors throughout the country, state legislative council, and parliament. And many of these figures and many of these parties actually won. Yes, Chavismo won overwhelmingly, and I think that has many other explanations. But this would be a far more closer precursor to sharing power than the other one. But it didn't happen anyway. I mean, it was overwhelmingly. Sorry?
When did those elections occur, Diego, the ones you're talking about now?
Last year.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So that's basically, and also previous year in 2024. But I mean, that's basically what it also needs to be taken into account. If you're going to, let's play for a moment with the power sharing scenario, and some criteria has to be met about that so-called possible share scenario, and in which there are laws, there are highly sensitive laws regarding sovereignty, regarding security regarding criminal laws
Mhm.
for people who actively promoted, and even there's a memo that says that part of the legal thinking to justify what happened on January the 3rd relied on the demands of a certain leader of this extremist opposition called Maria Corina Machado. I mean, and if we're going to all acknowledge the same legal framework, does she fit in that? And after all this self-humiliation that she was gone through, and shamelessness, but like we said, she doesn't feel anything. I mean, she's eyes on the prize forever. And this is, by the way, pretty much a psychotic behavior. But anyway, is she going to be accepted in this under this framework? It should be, one more time, if it gets to happen, that way, will be completely U.S. imposed, but not because of what she could comprehensively represent regarding the different factions' opinions and means of participating of the actual Venezuelan opposition inside government and parliament. Inside, I mean, they now have they have, for example, there's one state now governed by the opposition, Cojedes, but it doesn't mean that they weren't candidates they were actually running for the other states they used to control. So I mean, it's far more nuanced, is what I'm trying to say. It's far more contradictory. And yes, she doesn't have that clout. She doesn't have that place. And I don't know still at this moment what most of the reactions are regarding yesterday. And the optics, regardless of some people say it was protocol, of just coming into the White House through the kitchen door, and try to blow it up a bit and saying that these people were invited and Marco Rubio was there. And so, of course, Marco Rubio was there. This is Marco Rubio lobbying his own asset from the start. And being this some sort of Frankensteinish plan the day after, this is also him trying to force that part of his input into the plan. Or at least it's quite easy to imagine that this is the case. So it would be a really hard one. I wouldn't accept it as a citizen myself, that kind of formula.
Yeah.
I might understand it, but I wouldn't be happy about it at all.
Yeah. Acting in such an obsequious manner as she did towards a man who is responsible for so much suffering in Venezuela, I can't imagine that won her a lot of fans amongst the Venezuelan people.
Harm now also before in the previous, in Trump won, first chapter, both.
Right. So lastly, Diego, I wanted just to ask you about the general mood in the country. How are things now? Do you see a return to normalcy, stability? Do people, is there more social cohesion now than before the kidnapping of President Maduro? What is your sense of how the Venezuelan people are feeling at this moment?
The actual way to answer this, or a different way to put it in different words, would be there's no actual social disintegration. There's no social upheaval. There's no unrest. There's no one taking the momentum to topple the current government. There's no celebration of the bombings on any level. Maybe to some extent, and privately for some people, but there's no actual celebration going on, and there's no something that furthers that possibility of some way of regime changing. This comes because even before this, and I've been saying this, this is one of the things that have been said the most all these months, not only these days, which is basically people keep going about their own businesses because normalcy and peace and stability is like the goal. And this is the way everything has been going, even after January the 3rd. It has different, of course, manifestations as well. For example, the rallies, the political demonstrations in cities from the more mobilized part of society. But then you have also, and you have to take also into account that this slow January, it's usually the case in Venezuela. So it's slower than usual. And there is, of course, an extra layer of burden here because of what happened and because of the uncertainty where we are right now. But beyond the point of military action, bombing and destruction themselves, which are massive, the rest of things, these are something that people know and have gone through before, and it has been far worse before. So I think this is the general reaction, which is, I always address this as one of the key forms of resistance on a battle landscape in which it has focused heavily on the psychological aspects of things, and the mind hacking and the cognitive war and the economic terrorism that also makes the civilians, the normal population, the main target, regardless of what happens to in a higher level between states. This has been the case, and it has been proven one more time. Like I've also said, I'm not happy about this, and I'm not celebrating this fact. I'm just reminding that this also happened. In Caracas, for example, a stronghold against Chavismo was impacted by the shockwave, and it was a residential area. Many of these people who had never supported Chavismo, and probably even with the possibility of supporting even military action, went through that kind of hellish experience, you know? And it's also a reminder that this goes beyond affiliations. It's harder to find dividing lines inside Venezuela, you know? And that's why also Corina Machado seems so weird in the way she frames things. Because no one sees the other here as especially now, especially after so much, and especially also as many of the radical factions are part of the diaspora and not inside the country. You don't see your fellow country man or woman as the enemy.
Yeah.
And most of us know we all suffer together, you know? But I'm saying all of this because we still have to come slower into terms with the aftermath. Especially in Caracas, Caracas, La Guaira, and Miranda State, which were the most impacted one. But that doesn't mean that this is going to paralyze or impede the need of people to keep caring about their own lives, be it participating also politically, supporting the government, supporting Nicolás Maduro's return, or be it, or even not being affiliated, but denouncing it nevertheless. You can see that part in social media as well. Even with Gen Z kids denouncing the ones who were craving for an invasion, and now they say, "Well, I'm waiting for you here, man. It already happened, and you're still there." You know, there's a deep move again, and it's so there's the picture's going to be, it's going to be shaped for one more time, but it's not losing track, and it's not a rupture with what has been up to this point, especially after 5 years, 6 years. Up to this point.
Actually, I have a follow-up question about this, Diego, because
Sure.
you reminded me about an experience I just had in relation to the regime change war on Iran. There was a protest here in Montreal in support of the demonstrators in Iran, and I went to the protest to interview people, and I discovered that there was overwhelming support at this protest for the son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi. And I know this because they were all holding up posters and they were chanting his name when I arrived there. And then I interviewed some of them, and they were very clear that they have immense admiration for the son of the Shah and so forth. And, you know, the Canadian media, when they were covering this, they were clearly trying to convey the impression, whether wittingly or unwittingly, that the political perspective of these people is representative of the political perspective of people living inside Iran itself. And I think we've seen the same tactic employed with respect to Venezuela. As soon as President Maduro's kidnapped, you see some Venezuelans in Miami, they're celebrating in the streets, or maybe in New York, and everybody assumes that those people represent the political perspectives of those inside Venezuela. Just finally, which want to invite you to comment on this, like from where you sit, these people outside of the country, Venezuelans who celebrated what the United States government has done to Venezuela, to what degree are their views shared by people on the ground who are currently living inside the country?
there must be some, but they're not as vocal as the diaspora in that sense. They're not. I mean, you have also, and I think this is part of the impact of sanctions, which is important, and it's not as definitive, but it has a significant place. It's actually more disenfranchisement from politics than supporting any option whatsoever. You know, that kind of lack of hope, or disappointment with politics in general after being an extremely highly politicized country to each and every level in a very dynamic way, which still remains being. But of course, after the undermining of the livelihood in many economic ways, regardless of now, we are actually in a recovering phase of all of this, which, by the way, also explains the urgency to do what they did back in January the 3rd. It's far more common than people supporting the extremists. That's far more common. And and in some cases, this also, and this is the usual ideal raw material for, and the ideal audience as well for psyops, because this is the people that might be easier to convince to one way or another, to woo one way or another, to sway one way or another at a given point. But these are also people who remember what has happened, and also have been disappointed and conned and fooled by precisely the types like Maria Corina Machado. But the thing about Maria Corina Machado and Risa Paslevi, the unemployed prince, is that they are basically two parts of the same conveyor belt, and they're so exact, actually, regardless of what they say, the talking points, the way to approach it, the cognitive dissonance they actually represent between the gap of how they've seen inside the country and how they've seen for the West, for for feel-good matters, for the liberal cabal or whatever, and how they actually are coordinating and have been coordinating ever since. When the war of aggression last year in Iran was going on, they tried to go false flag against a synagogue here in Caracas and try to put the blame on, IRGC or whatever, the Quds Brigade or something. It failed. It was foiled before it happened. But this shows what kind of coordination actually was going on between them. And they represent something else and something darker from my point of view, Dimitri. And I think this is important to take into account. They represent the impossibility of actually sorting out any kind of internal political resolutions that Venezuelan or Iranian society demands, regardless of what they are. Because this actually rigs the terms in which this can happen in the best ways possible. I mean, it's crazy to think that, for example, me, who I support the government, I'm going to be against some sort of reconciliation that actually is going to make us all acknowledge what the problems are and how they need to be solved and what are the priorities. I mean, this is common ground that anyone can get here, for that matter. But this kind of people are actually by design used precisely to fracture any possibility of any kind of organic, natural dialogue between a whole complex, contradictory, and crazy society like ours. So this is important because this is also a way of softly stealing chunks of sovereignty from the mind of many people.
Well said, my friend. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Diego. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and I hope we can have you back on as we continue to follow this vitally important story of the struggle in Venezuela for sovereignty. So we'll be signing off today from Caracas and Montreal for Reason to Resist on January 16th, 2025.